October 2014. AMD stock price, $2.90. The company was drowning in $2.2 billion of debt. Their latest processors were so bad that customers openly mocked them. Intel controlled 99% of the server market. Lisa Su walked into her first day as CEO knowing she had one shot to save AMD. One impossible promise echoed in her mind: beat Intel at their own game. Within 5 years. Everyone thought she was crazy. Intel had decades of R&D advantage, unlimited resources, the best engineers money could buy. Su had something else. A plan so radical it would either save AMD or destroy what was left of it. But to understand how she pulled off the impossible, you need to see just how far AMD had fallen. AMD wasn't always Intel's punching bag. In the early 2000s, they were the scrappy innovators. Their Athlon processors actually beat Intel's chips. Gamers loved them, enthusiasts swore by them. For a brief moment, AMD was winning. Then everything went wrong. The bulldozer architecture launched in 2011. It was supposed to be AMD's comeback. Instead, it became their nightmare. The processors ran hot. Performance was terrible. Single-threaded applications crawled. Intel's chips weren't just better, they were embarrassingly better. Customers fled. AMD's reputation in high-performance computing died overnight. The company that once challenged Intel became a joke. The financial crisis hit like a sledgehammer. AMD sold off their fabrication plants to global foundries. They had no choice. The debt was crushing them. Every year brought the same ritual: lay off 25% of the workforce. Watch talented engineers walk out the door. Pray the company survived another quarter. By 2014, AMD's server market share had collapsed to less than 1%. 1%. Intel didn't just dominate, they owned the entire industry. Data center customers wouldn't even consider AMD chips. Why would they? AMD couldn't deliver performance. They couldn't guarantee supply. They were the walking dead of Silicon Valley. The Austin campus? Sold to pay bills. AMD had to lease back their own headquarters just to have somewhere to work. That's how desperate things had become. Then Lisa Su got the call. Su wasn't your typical tech CEO. Born in Taiwan, raised in Queens, she was an engineer first. MIT undergrad, MIT master's, MIT PhD in electrical engineering. She understood semiconductors at the molecular level. Her career was built on impossible challenges. 13 years at IBM during Lou Gerstner's legendary turnaround. She watched the big blue elephant learn to dance again. She helped develop copper interconnects that improved chip speed by 20%. She knew what transformation looked like. But this was different. When Su accepted the CEO role in October 2014, the full scope of AMD's problems hit her. The company wasn't just behind. They were broken. The engineering talent was still there, buried under years of failed strategies and broken promises. The technology pipeline was empty. Customer relationships were shattered. Her communications chief asked a simple question: "What do you want to say to the employees?" Su stared at him. She hadn't even thought about it. What do you tell people when their company is dying? We all fall down at some point. The question is, will you get back up?
This part of the program is sponsored by Pause Wars. Gear up for happy tales. Sniff out pausewars.com, where your pet's wag comes with a splash of style.
When every analyst thinks you should just give up. She sat down and wrote her first letter. 3 priorities: refocus on building great products, rebuild customer relationships, and simplify everything. AMD was acting like a massive corporation when they were barely surviving as a mid-sized company. The message was clear: we're going to move fast, take risks, and bet everything on being the best. Some employees loved it, others walked away. They weren't ready for what Sue was planning, because what she had in mind wasn't just a turnaround, it was a complete reinvention. Sue had seen impossible turnarounds before, but this was different. IBM had resources. AMD was bleeding money. IBM had time. AMD had maybe 2 years before the lights went out. IBM faced business challenges. AMD faced an existential crisis. But Sue saw something others missed. AMD still had brilliant engineers. They had decades of processor expertise. They had patents. They had heart. Most importantly, they had nothing left to lose. While Intel got comfortable with their monopoly, Sue was about to make the biggest bet in semiconductor history. She would abandon everything AMD thought they knew about competing. No more following Intel's playbook. No more settling for second place. She was going to build something completely new, something so revolutionary that Intel wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. The plan was insane. The timeline was impossible. The resources were inadequate. Sue didn't care. She'd rather fail attempting greatness than succeed at mediocrity. The transformation was about to begin. Sue's first board meeting as CEO was brutal. The directors wanted answers. How do you compete with Intel when they have unlimited resources? When they control 99% of the server market? When customers won't even return your calls? Everyone had suggestions. Build mobile chips for smartphones. That's where the growth is. Follow Qualcomm's playbook. Make cheaper, lower power processors. Accept that AMD would always be the budget option. Sue listened to every word. Then she said something that shocked the room. We're not going into mobile. We're going all in on high-performance computing. The silence was deafening. Board members stared at her like she'd lost her mind. High-performance computing? That's Intel's fortress. That's where they're strongest. That's suicide. Sue didn't blink. We're going to build the biggest, fastest processors in the world. We're going to take Intel head-on in their own backyard. The questions came fast. How? With what money? What technology? Intel has been perfecting high-performance chips for decades. They have the best fabs, the biggest R&D budgets, the smartest engineers. Sue had an answer that would change everything. We're going to redesign processors from the ground up. We're calling it Zen. Here's what made Sue's plan so radical. For decades, everyone built processors the same way. You start with a single piece of silicon. You cram as many transistors as possible onto that chip. When you need more performance, you make the chip bigger. Bigger chips, more transistors, more speed. But there's a problem. As chips get bigger, they get exponentially harder to manufacture. Yields drop. Costs skyrocket. You hit physical limits that can't be overcome. Sue's team proposed something completely different. Instead of building one massive chip, build smaller chiplets. Connect them together like Lego blocks. Each chiplet handles specific tasks. Need more performance? Add more chiplets. Intel's engineers laughed. They're just gluing chips together, they said. It was meant as an insult. Sue wore it like a badge of honor. The chiplet approach solved problems Intel couldn't. Manufacturing yields were higher because smaller chips have fewer defects. Costs were lower because you could mix and match components. Scaling was easier because you could add chiplets based on customer needs. But it had never been done before. Not at this scale, not for high-performance processors.
This part of the program is sponsored by Via Nature, where nature meets innovation. Visit vianature.com. Your planet-friendly goodies are just a click away.
Sue knew why. The technical challenges were immense. How do you connect chiplets without creating bottlenecks? How do you manage power across multiple chips? How do you keep everything synchronized at gigahertz speeds? Her engineering team worked through the problems one by one. New interconnect technologies, advanced packaging techniques, revolutionary power management. They were essentially inventing a new way to build processors. The timeline was insane. Sue told the board they needed 3 generations to beat Intel. Zen 1 would be competitive. Zen 2 would be better. Zen 3 would be the best in the industry. 5 years from start to finish. 5 years to go from worst to first. 5 years to overcome Intel's decades of advantage. 5 years to save AMD. Internal resistance was immediate. Senior executives who'd been at AMD for decades couldn't believe it. They'd spent years trying to match Intel's approach. Now Su wanted to abandon everything and start over? Some of AMD's most experienced leaders walked away. They couldn't handle the uncertainty. The risk was too high, the timeline too aggressive. Better to find safer jobs at established companies. Su didn't try to stop them. She needed believers, not skeptics. The Zen project required total commitment. Every engineer had to believe they could achieve the impossible. The ones who stayed bought into Su's vision completely. They weren't just building processors. They were rewriting the rules of semiconductor design. They were David preparing to face Goliath. But David only gets one shot with his slingshot. The pressure was crushing. AMD was burning through cash. Intel wasn't sitting still. They accelerated their own development programs, cut prices to protect market share, and warned customers that AMD couldn't be trusted. Su's team worked 18-hour days. Weekends disappeared. Families saw engineers only in passing. The weight of AMD's survival rested on their shoulders. Early prototypes showed promise. The chiplet approach was working. Performance numbers looked good. Power efficiency was better than expected. But prototypes aren't products. Getting from lab to market is where most ambitious projects die. Manufacturing partnerships had to be rebuilt. AMD's relationship with global foundries was strained. They needed backup plans, alternative suppliers. Su negotiated deals with TSMC, the Taiwanese foundry that made chips for Apple and Nvidia. Every decision carried enormous risk. Wrong choice on manufacturing? Game over. Miss performance targets? Game over. Delay the launch? Game over. Su's engineering background became crucial. She could dive deep into technical discussions, understand the real challenges, and make informed decisions when her team hit roadblocks. The plan was set. Zen 1 would launch in 2017. It had to work. AMD had no backup plan, no safety net, no second chances. But having a plan and executing it are two different things. The engineering nightmare, 5 years of sleepless nights. The Zen architecture looked perfect on paper. In reality, building it was like performing surgery on a patient while the operating room was on fire. Su's team faced a problem that would break most companies. They were designing processors with over 40 billion transistors, each transistor smaller than a virus.
This part of the program is sponsored by The Tria, oasis of comfort with a touch of luxury. Visit thetria.com. Your dream home vibe is just a scroll away.
Any single defect could kill the entire chip. The manufacturing nightmare began immediately. AMD's partnership with Global Foundries was supposed to handle production, but Global Foundries couldn't deliver the performance Su needed. Their 14-nanometer process wasn't ready. Yields were terrible. Quality was inconsistent. Su had to make a brutal decision. Abandon Global Foundries for critical components and bet everything on TSMC, the Taiwanese foundry. It meant starting manufacturing relationships from scratch. It meant higher costs. It meant trusting AMD's survival to a company on the other side of the world. The engineering challenges multiplied daily. Connecting chiplets required revolutionary interconnect technology. The latency between chips had to be nearly zero. Power management across multiple chiplets was a nightmare. Heat dissipation pushed thermal limits to breaking points. Mark Papermaster, Su's chief technology officer, lived at the office. His team worked around the clock, debugging problems that had never been solved before. How do you synchronize billions of transistors across multiple chips? How do you prevent signal interference when everything is packed so tightly together? Early prototypes failed spectacularly. Memory controllers crashed. Interconnects overheated. Performance was inconsistent. Some chips worked perfectly. Others were paperweights. Meanwhile, AMD was hemorrhaging money. Every month of development cost millions. Sue's CFO, Devinder Kumar, performed financial miracles to keep the lights on. They renegotiated debt, sold assets, delayed payments, bought time with creative accounting. Intel sensed weakness and struck back viciously. They slashed prices on competing processors, locked customers into long-term contracts, spread rumors about AMD's financial stability. The message was clear. Why risk buying from a company that might not exist next year? Customer relationships were in shambles. Forrest Norrod, who ran AMD's data center business, faced brutal meetings with potential clients. Dell's executives were blunt. "We love AMD, but we can't trust what you say. You've promised performance before and failed to deliver." Sue took this personally. She started visiting customers directly, not just CEOs, but engineers and procurement teams. She wanted them to see her commitment, to understand that this time was different. The most famous trip happened during a Texas ice storm. Antonio Neri, CEO of Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, was considering a major AMD deal. Sue could have sent a subordinate. Instead, she drove through dangerous conditions to meet him face to face. "I'm stopping my old roadmap because it's not good enough," she told Neri. "I'm building something completely new. Please trust me. It will take time, but this is the right thing to do." Neri agreed to support AMD if they delivered on their promises. Sue's word became her bond. If she committed to performance targets, AMD would hit them. If she promised delivery dates, they would ship on time. Back in the labs, the pressure was crushing. Engineers worked 18-hour days debugging problems that textbooks said were impossible to solve. Marriages strained. Health suffered. Some brilliant minds cracked under the pressure and left for less stressful jobs. Sue spent hours walking through engineering areas, not for photo ops or meetings, but to understand real problems. She'd find engineers hunched over oscilloscopes at midnight and ask simple questions. What's not working? What do you need? Her technical background was crucial. She could dive into circuit diagrams, understand thermal modeling, make informed decisions about trade-offs between performance and reliability. The breakthrough moment came in late 2016. The first Zen 1 processors were working consistently. Performance tests showed they were actually beating Intel's chips in multi-threaded workloads. Power efficiency was better than expected. The chiplet approach was delivering on its promises. But working prototypes weren't shipping products. The team had to solve manufacturing at scale, debug software compatibility issues, and handle thermal problems in different system configurations. Memory compatibility became a nightmare. Zen's memory controller was more aggressive than Intel's. Some memory modules that worked perfectly with Intel chips caused crashes with AMD processors. Forums filled with frustrated users reporting system instability. Sue's team worked frantically on microcode updates. They partnered with memory manufacturers to optimize compatibility, fixed bugs in real time as customers reported problems. It was embarrassing, but necessary. Security researchers discovered vulnerabilities in early Zen chips. The Spectre attacks that affected all processors hit AMD particularly hard because they were already fighting credibility battles. Every security flaw became front-page news. The team implemented hardware mitigations, released firmware updates, worked with operating system vendors to deploy software patches. They turned potential disasters into demonstrations of AMD's commitment to customer security. Through it all, Sue maintained her vision. Zen 1 was just the beginning. Zen 2 would be better. Zen 3 would achieve leadership. The 5-year plan remained on track despite every obstacle. By early 2017, Final Zen 1 processors were ready for launch. Performance exceeded internal targets. Manufacturing yields were acceptable. Customer samples were generating excitement. Intel's executives were nervous. For the first time in years, AMD had built something genuinely competitive. The monopoly was about to end. Then came the moment that changed everything. March 2nd, 2017. The Moscone Center in San Francisco was packed with journalists, analysts, and tech enthusiasts. Lisa Su walked onto the stage knowing this moment would define AMD's future. 5 years of impossible work, billions of dollars invested, thousands of engineering hours. Everything came down to the next 30 minutes. Today, we're bringing competition back to high-performance computing, Su announced. Behind her, slides showed Ryzen's specifications: 8 cores, 16 threads, performance that matched Intel's best processors at half the price. The audience was skeptical. They'd heard AMD promises before. Bulldozer was supposed to be revolutionary too. But then Su revealed the benchmark numbers. Ryzen delivered a 52% improvement in instructions per cycle compared to AMD's previous generation. In multi-threaded workloads, it was beating Intel's flagship processors. The room erupted. This wasn't incremental improvement. This was a quantum leap. Intel's response was immediate and panicked. Within hours, they announced emergency price cuts across their entire processor lineup. Chips that cost $1,000 the day before were suddenly $600. Intel's executives held emergency meetings. How had AMD caught up so quickly? The answer was chiplets. While Intel struggled with manufacturing massive single chips, AMD's modular approach was delivering better yields and lower costs. What Intel's engineers had mocked as gluing chips together was actually genius. Gaming enthusiasts were the first converts. For years, they'd been forced to pay Intel's premium prices. Suddenly, AMD offered similar performance at dramatically lower costs. Reddit forums exploded with Ryzen builds. YouTube reviewers couldn't believe the value proposition. But the real validation came from enterprise customers. These were the skeptics who'd rejected AMD for years, data center managers who wouldn't even take AMD's calls, server administrators who considered Intel the only serious option. Forrest Norrid's phone started ringing. The same customers who'd told him, "We can't trust AMD," were suddenly interested. Google wanted samples. Microsoft requested technical briefings. Amazon began evaluating Ryzen-based servers. The psychological shift was profound. AMD wasn't the desperate underdog anymore. They were a legitimate Intel competitor. For the first time in years, customers had real choice in high-performance processors. Su's vindication came in the quarterly earnings call. AMD posted their first profitable quarter in years. Revenue was up 18% year over year. Gross margins improved dramatically. The stock price, which had languished below $3 for years, jumped to $15. But Ryzen was just the beginning. Su's team had simultaneously developed EPYC, server processors based on the same Zen architecture. These chips targeted Intel's most profitable market segment, data centers. EPYC processors offered more cores, more memory bandwidth, and better price performance than Intel's Xeon lineup. Cloud providers, always focused on cost efficiency, took notice immediately. The breakthrough moment came when Google announced they were deploying AMD EPYC processors in their data centers. Google doesn't make technology decisions lightly. Their endorsement validated AMD's return to relevance. Amazon Web Services followed with their own AMD-based instances. Microsoft Azure announced EPYC-powered virtual machines. The hyperscale cloud providers that power the internet were betting on AMD. Intel fought back desperately. They accelerated product launches, slashed prices further, warned customers about AMD's limited manufacturing capacity. But the momentum had shifted. AMD's market share began climbing steadily. In desktop processors, they captured over 20% of the market within a year. In servers, their share grew from less than 1% to over 10%. The numbers were still small, but the trajectory was clear. Sue's 5-year plan was working ahead of schedule. Zen 1 had achieved competitiveness. Zen 2, launching in 2019, would be even better. The 7-nanometer manufacturing process from TSMC gave AMD a temporary advantage over Intel's struggling 10-nanometer technology. The gaming community embraced AMD completely. Console manufacturers Sony and Microsoft both chose AMD processors for their next-generation PlayStation and Xbox systems. Suddenly, AMD was powering the most popular gaming platforms in the world. Enthusiast builders who'd sworn by Intel for decades switched to AMD. The performance was there. The value was undeniable. The underdog story resonated with people who loved rooting against monopolies. Professional workstation users discovered Ryzen's multi-threaded performance was perfect for content creation. Video editors, 3D artists, and software developers found AMD processors often outperformed Intel's offerings in real-world applications. The financial transformation was stunning. AMD's revenue grew from $4 billion in 2015 to over $6 billion by 2018. Operating margins improved from negative territory to healthy profitability. The company that was nearly bankrupt was suddenly generating serious cash flow. Sue's leadership style became a case study in business schools. She'd taken enormous risks, bet everything on unproven technology, ignored conventional wisdom about competing with Intel. The results spoke for themselves. But perhaps the most important change was cultural. AMD's employees weren't just surviving anymore, they were winning. The fear of layoffs was replaced by pride in their products. Engineers who'd considered leaving for Intel suddenly wanted to stay and be part of something special. The industry took notice. AMD was hiring aggressively. Top talent from Intel, NVIDIA, and other competitors joined Sue's team. The company that couldn't retain engineers was suddenly attracting the best minds in semiconductors. Sue's vision extended beyond just catching Intel. She wanted AMD to lead in next-generation technologies. Artificial intelligence was emerging as the next battleground. Machine learning workloads demanded massive computational power. Graphics processing was becoming crucial for more than just gaming. The Ryzen launch proved AMD could execute at the highest level. They delivered on every promise. Performance targets were met. Launch dates were hit. Manufacturing scaled successfully. Customer relationships were rebuilt. Intel's monopoly was broken. Competition had returned to the processor market. Innovation accelerated as both companies pushed each other to new heights. But the real test was yet to come. The artificial intelligence revolution was about to reshape the entire technology industry, and Sue was preparing for AMD's next impossible challenge. 2020 changed everything. The pandemic accelerated digital transformation across every industry. Cloud computing exploded. Remote work demanded more powerful processors. Data centers became the backbone of the global economy. But something else was happening, something that would reshape the entire technology landscape. Artificial intelligence was moving from research labs to real-world applications. ChatGPT wouldn't launch until 2022, but the foundations were being built. Machine learning models were getting larger. Training algorithms required massive computational power. A new kind of processor war was beginning. NVIDIA had seen it coming first. Their graphics cards, originally designed for gaming, turned out to be perfect for AI training. By 2020, NVIDIA's H100 processors were the gold standard for machine learning. Their stock price soared as every tech company desperately bought GPU clusters. Sue watched this transformation with growing concern. AMD had finally caught Intel in traditional processors, but artificial intelligence threatened to make traditional processors irrelevant. If NVIDIA dominated AI computing the way Intel had dominated CPUs, AMD could become irrelevant again. The challenge was enormous. NVIDIA had a 10-year head start in AI hardware. Their CUDA software ecosystem was deeply entrenched. Every major AI framework was optimized for NVIDIA chips. Switching costs for customers were massive. But Sue had learned something crucial from the Ryzen experience. You don't beat established players by copying them. You beat them by doing something completely different. AMD's strategy was ambitious. Instead of just building AI training chips, they would create a complete computing ecosystem. CPUs for general processing, GPUs for AI acceleration, FPGAs for specialized workloads. Everything working together seamlessly. The first major move came in 2022. AMD announced they were acquiring Xilinx for $49 billion. It was the largest acquisition in AMD's history. Xilinx made field-programmable gate arrays, chips that could be reconfigured for specific tasks after manufacturing. Wall Street was skeptical. Why spend $49 billion on a company most people had never heard of? The answer was strategic. AI workloads were incredibly diverse. Some needed massive parallel processing. Others required ultra-low latency. FPGAs could adapt to any requirement. The acquisition gave AMD something NVIDIA didn't have: flexibility. While NVIDIA's chips were optimized for specific AI workloads, AMD could offer customized solutions for any application. But acquisitions alone wouldn't win the AI war. AMD needed to build chips that could compete directly with NVIDIA's flagship processors. The MI300 series was their answer. Massive AI accelerators designed specifically for training large language models. The development was brutal. AI chips required even more transistors than traditional processors. Heat dissipation was a nightmare. Memory bandwidth demands were insane. Sue's engineering teams worked around the clock, solving problems that pushed physics to its limits. Meanwhile, the competitive landscape was shifting rapidly. Intel was struggling with manufacturing problems. Their 10-nanometer process was delayed repeatedly. AMD's partnership with TSMC gave them access to cutting-edge 5-nanometer and 3-nanometer technologies. The advantage was temporary, but crucial. AMD could build more advanced chips than Intel for the first time in decades. Sue pushed her teams to exploit every advantage while it lasted. The family rivalry added personal stakes to the business competition. Jensen Huang, NVIDIA's CEO, was Sue's cousin. Family gatherings became awkward as their companies battled for market share. The media loved the story. Cousin versus cousin in the ultimate Silicon Valley showdown. But Sue wasn't intimidated by NVIDIA's success. She'd already proven that dominant companies could be disrupted. Intel had seemed invincible too, until Ryzen changed everything. The breakthrough came in 2023. AMD's MI300X processors demonstrated they could match NVIDIA's H100 performance, while offering better memory capacity and lower power consumption. Major cloud providers began testing AMD's AI chips for the first time. Microsoft was the first major customer to commit. They announced plans to use AMD processors in Azure's AI services. Amazon Web Services followed with their own AMD-powered machine learning instances. Google began evaluating AMD chips for their internal AI workloads. The validation was enormous. These companies had billions invested in AI infrastructure. They wouldn't risk using inferior processors. AMD's chips were genuinely competitive with NVIDIA's best offerings. Sue's strategy was working. But she knew hardware alone wasn't enough. Software ecosystems determine winners in technology battles. NVIDIA's CUDA platform had a decade of development and optimization. AMD needed to catch up quickly. The ROCm software platform became AMD's answer to CUDA. It allowed developers to run existing AI applications on AMD hardware with minimal changes. The transition wasn't seamless, but it was possible. AMD also made a bold strategic move. They announced plans to acquire ZT Systems for $4.9 billion. ZT designed complete data center solutions, not just individual chips. The acquisition would give AMD end-to-end control over AI infrastructure. The financial results were stunning. AMD's data center revenue grew 80% year-over-year in 2024. AI processor sales were expected to reach $4 billion for the year. But perhaps the most meaningful milestone came in March 2024. AMD's market capitalization surpassed Intel's for the first time in history. The student had become the master. The underdog was now the leader. The transformation wasn't just financial. AMD's culture had completely changed. The fear and desperation of 2014 were replaced by confidence and ambition. Engineers who once worried about layoffs were now competing for the best projects. Su's leadership philosophy had proven itself repeatedly. Take enormous risks. Bet on breakthrough technologies. Ignore conventional wisdom. Execute flawlessly. The results spoke for themselves. AMD was no longer just surviving the AI revolution. They were helping to lead it. The company that almost died was now shaping the future of computing. But Su wasn't satisfied with just catching up to NVIDIA. She wanted AMD to define what came next in artificial intelligence and beyond. 10 years. That's how long it took Lisa Su to rewrite the rules of Silicon Valley. When she became CEO in 2014, AMD was worth $3 billion. By 2024, the company's market capitalization had exploded to over $200 billion, a 6,600% increase. One of the greatest wealth creation stories in technology history. But the numbers only tell part of the story. Su didn't just save AMD. She fundamentally changed how the entire semiconductor industry operates. The chiplet architecture that Intel once mocked as gluing chips together became the industry standard. Intel, NVIDIA, and every major processor manufacturer now use modular designs pioneered by AMD. The competitive landscape transformed completely. For decades, Intel's monopoly stifled innovation. Processors improved incrementally. Prices stayed artificially high. Customers had no real alternatives. Su's success forced Intel to innovate again. They slashed prices, accelerated development timelines, launched new architectures years ahead of schedule. The competition benefited everyone who used computers. Data center customers finally had choices. Cloud providers could optimize for performance, power efficiency, or cost, depending on their needs. The hyperscale companies that power the internet saved billions by switching to AMD processors. Gaming enthusiasts got incredible value. High-performance processors that once cost $1,000 became available for $300. Mainstream users could afford workstation-class performance. The entire PC market was revitalized. But Su's impact extended far beyond semiconductors. She became one of the most visible women in technology leadership. In an industry dominated by men, her success inspired countless female engineers and executives. She proved that technical expertise combined with strategic vision could overcome any obstacle. The lesson resonated throughout Silicon Valley. You don't have to accept your position in the market. Dominant companies can be disrupted. Monopolies can be broken. We all fall down at some point. The question is, will you get back up? The impossible can become inevitable with the right strategy and relentless execution. Su's approach became a business school case study. take enormous risks on breakthrough technologies. Ignore conventional wisdom about competing with giants. Focus on long-term vision over short-term profits. Build products so good that customers can't ignore them. The transformation wasn't just corporate, it was personal. Sue proved that immigrant engineers could reshape entire industries, that quiet technical leaders could outperform flashy marketing executives, that patient strategic thinking could defeat unlimited resources. Looking ahead, AMD is positioned at the center of computing's next revolution. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, edge processing, the technologies that will define the next decade of innovation. Sue's refusal to accept defeat didn't just change AMD. It changed Silicon Valley's understanding of what's possible when brilliant engineers are given the freedom to pursue impossible dreams. The CEO who walked into a dying company with $2.2 billion in debt had created something far more valuable than money. She'd created proof that in technology, the future belongs to those brave enough to build it.